Hey everyone, my name is Shakarez, and today we'll be taking a look at recently reworked Shen. We'll be going over Shen's two main roles, top lane and support, and also some tips on ability usage and how to play him. First and foremost, it's important to look at his abilities, and the addition of his Spirit Blade. It's essentially like Orianna's Ball, but it's somewhat harder to move around and manipulate. Shen's passive is Key Barrier, which grants Shen a shield based on his level and bonus health after he uses an ability. The shield lasts for 2.5 seconds and it has a static cooldown of 10 seconds, but it goes down whenever you affect the champion with an ability, regardless of said champion being on your team or the enemy team. Shen's Q is Twilight Assault. Shen calls his Spirit Blade to him, and his next 3 auto attacks deal bonus magic damage. If Shen's blade goes through an enemy, then he'll get extra attack speed and extra percentage maximum health damage on the empowered autos. He'll also slow the enemies if they're running away from him. Shen's W is Spirit's Refuge. A protective zone is cast around his Spirit Blade and will protect him or his allies from auto attacks for a short time. It will wait a few seconds before activating if no one is inside the zone in the beginning of the cast. Shen's E, Shadow Dash, and R, Stand United, are essentially the same skills as before. Shadow Dash is a skill shot dash that will taunt enemies when hit, and Stand United is a global ultimate that shields and teleports Shen to the ally that has been chosen, alongside with his Spirit Blade. It's important to mention that Shen's E has a passive that recovers his energy whenever he does damage with Shadow Dash or Twilight Assault, but we'll talk about this later. Now then, let's move on to talk about what's his traditional role. Top lane. In the top lane, Shen's identity remains essentially the same. He's a tank that scales phenomenally into the late game. However, the fact that his shield is no longer an active ability, and the fact that Vorpal Blade is no longer an ability as well, means he has no way of harassing or farming from range. His lane sustain is also decreased due to the lack of Vorpal Blade, so he really suffers versus some matchups, especially ranged. By level 6 is when you start having impact on the map. Constantly look for opportunities to either teleport or use Stand United on an ally that is in danger in order to turn around a fight that's not going so well. After the laning phase and by mid to late game, you should be mostly trying to push side lanes while the rest of your team groups up. However, if your Stand United isn't up, or if you're needed as the main engage tool, it can be a better decision to simply stay with the rest of your team. Now let's briefly touch what you should use as your setup for top lane Shen. For runes, you have a ton of options. Hybrid penetration marks are great on Shen since you have a lot of mixed damage, while attack speed marks will help you proc your Twilight Assault with more ease. For seals, health per level should be your go-to pick, but armor works as well. For glyphs, I personally like to run cooldown reduction per level. However, you can also run flat cooldown reduction or magic resistance, flat or per level. For quintessences, health regeneration will help you a lot to sustain in lane, but you can mix those up with armor and or magic resistance quintessences, depending on the matchup you're up against. For masteries, your keystone should definitely be Grasp of the Undying, so you're going for 18 points in Resolve. For the other 12 points, you should go into Ferocity for better combat stats, but Cunning isn't a bad tree either. As for skill maxing, you definitely want Q first as it's your main damage ability as solo lane Shen. Energy and cooldown go down with rank, so by rank 5 you can start using it very often. After that, you should max your Shadow Dash for a lower cooldown. In the early laning phase, you should start with Q for early trades. Shen definitely has a very strong level 1 and 2, and if you manage to put your opponent between yourself and the blade, you can definitely pull off very strong trades with Twilight Assault and Grasp of the Undying. For level 2, you will be taking Shadow Dash most of the time. However, Spirit's Refuge is an excellent skill against melee or ranged auto-based champions. Getting that skill early will catch your opponents off guard in a trade and will allow you to win that trade. As for your build, it will usually depend on what type of laner you're facing, but you'll usually want to rush a Bami Cinder. After that, you have 3 options. Go for a Spectre's Cowl if you're facing magic damage, and if up against physical damage, either finish Sunfire Cape or leave Bami's as it is and go for another item instead. Your core items will mostly be tank items. For magic resistance, consider picking up Spirit Visage and or Banshee's Veil, and for armor, Sunfire Cape, Deadman's Plate, Randuin's Omen, and or Thornmail. If you feel like you're ahead and want offensive items, Sterak's Gauge and Titanic Hydra are 2 very strong items that will still make you tanky while giving you strong offensive stats. Now on to support, and Shen's identity as a support pick hasn't changed that much. Just like on top lane, he has lost the ability to harass from range, and the lack of Vorpal Blade means he has less sustain for his laner. However, with Spirit's Refuge, he's able to protect his laner better in trades. His all-in is also better, as Twilight Assault can do massive damage, and by using Spirit's Refuge on yourself, you can essentially negate a lot of damage as well. In lane, Shen can really suffer against long-ranged lanes and poke lanes, but does decently in melee matchups, or if he can force an all-in on a squishier bot lane. As it is with top lane, your taunt allows you to set up ganks pretty easily, and even if you miss it, you can still use Twilight Assault to slow enemies when they run away from you. After level 6 is when the real fun starts. Your ultimate can be used globally to impact other lanes, or simply to trade better on bot lane. He's a pretty good roamer and can easily roam to another lane and then use Stand United back to bot lane in case things go south. From mid-game onwards, you're going to be one of the main engaged tools on your team, or alternatively, staying back in order to peel for your carries. Shen's support works really well with split pushers, as he can promptly aid them and give them an edge if a 1v1 breaks out while splitting. For runes, armor marks, flat health seals, magic resistance glyphs, and armor quints will guarantee you're very tanky in lane. Alternatively, you can pick up cooldown on your glyphs and health regen on quintessences. If you're missing out armor because you went for a different quintessences, you can also run armor seals. For masteries, 0, 12, 18 is the preferred setup for Shen, but the keystone you take will depend on the lane. If you feel like you can trade with the enemy bot lane, Grasp of the Undying is extremely strong on Shen, and will make him win a lot of trades when still sustaining himself. If you're playing against a lane where you think you're going to get poked out, consider going Bond of Stone for damage reduction for yourself and your AD carry. As for skill order, maxing Shadow Dash is definitely the way to go. It's your main crowd control ability, and maxing it increases your damage and reduces its cooldown. As for what you max second, you're probably better off maxing Twilight Assault in order to reduce energy costs and cooldown, and in order to move your blade more often. Finally, for the build, you'll want to start with Relic Shield and 3 potions. Early on, you'll want to build into a Sightstone, Face of the Mountain, and Boots. Your boot options can be either Ionian Boots of Lucidity or Boots of Swiftness. Tabbies and Mercs are an option as well, but you should be looking at the first two as your main options. Ionian Boots of Lucidity for the lower cooldowns, and Boots of Swiftness as the extra mobility makes landing taunts easier. From there, you either rush Locket against the heavy magic damage team, or Deadman's Plate against physical damage. From there, picking up more tank items and upgrading to Ruby Sightstone is the way to go. Now that we've looked at both top and support builds, let's talk about some basic combos and tricks you can use to get the most out of Shen. Taunt Flash, this one is the oldest Shen trick that you can still pull off. When you feel you're too far or just want to change direction midway, you flash before your taunt ends in order to cover a larger distance and still taunt your opponent. Taunt plus Twilight Assault. This is going to be your basic combo in most trades and even in teamfights. You taunt first and then call your Spirit Blade. This way, you guarantee it goes through your opponent, meaning they'll get slowed for a short duration after being taunted, and you'll also do extra damage to them. Taunt plus Spirit's Refuge plus Twilight Assault. A small variation of the one just mentioned before that will allow you to take less damage from incoming auto attacks with Spirit's Refuge on top of you. It's recommended to activate Spirit's Refuge immediately, as the duration on the dodge aura will not start until someone is inside the zone. Speaking of Spirit's Refuge, when sieging turrets, call the blade to you and stand close to your back line. Whenever they're going to get hit by enemy auto attacks, activate your Spirit's Refuge so you can keep them safe for an extra window of time. Finally, it's important to talk about energy consumption. When playing Shen, you'll sometimes feel like you're running out of energy too fast. This is likely because you're moving your blade too much and not actually using it on opponents. It's important to note that each auto attack with Twilight Assault and each taunt will restore energy, so if you're missing or not using your skills on opponents, you'll run out of energy very soon. Cooldown is a good stat on him, but you need to hit those skills in order to make good use of the stat. That's going to be all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed our brief overview on Shen, and see you in our next video.